The cabin stood alone like a relic from another life, sagging porch, rusted chimney, the surrounding forest swallowing its edges with every passing season. Daniel Hart had chosen this isolation. After 30 years as a forest ranger and 3 years grieving his late wife, solitude had become a kind of comfort. Trees didn't ask questions, silence didn't judge. But on the 4th autumn since his retirement, something disrupted the quiet. It started one evening with a sound he couldn't place. Not the heavy shuffling of deer, nor the frantic scratching of raccoons. This was lighter, purposeful, a presence. When Daniel opened the door, he half expected wind or shadows. But instead, there it was, a German shepherd, staring straight at him. The German shepherd looked half-starved. Its coat was weathered, paws cracked, ribs visible beneath a layer of dirt and old scars. But the eyes were different. Alert. Watching. Not afraid. Not asking. Waiting. No collar. No leash. No sound. Daniel narrowed his eyes. You lost, soldier? Of course, the German shepherd didn't answer. It didn't whimper, didn't wag its tail. It simply sat at the base of the porch like it had been stationed there. Daniel wasn't in the habit of taking in strays. But something about those eyes. He stepped back inside, returned a minute later with a chipped metal bowl and a piece of leftover venison jerky. He placed both gently at the edge of the steps, then turned back inside. In the morning, the food was gone. So was the German shepherd. But that night, it returned. Same spot, same stare. For 3 nights, the routine repeated. Appear. Vanish. By the 4th, Daniel had started leaving the porch light on. He wasn't sure why. The 5th night was different. The German shepherd didn't eat immediately. It paced near the porch, ears flicking at every sound in the trees. Then, it looked at Daniel through the screen door. Not like a hungry stray, but like someone trying to remember a face. Daniel stepped outside. Where do you go every night? The German shepherd turned its head toward the woods, then back to Daniel. It wasn't random wandering. That much was clear. There was intent behind it. The next morning, Daniel found deep tracks behind the cabin. The same prints he'd been seeing off and on, now fresh with dew. He followed them cautiously into the woods, not far, maybe 30 yards, before stopping cold. The air felt still, the kind of stillness that didn't belong in a healthy forest. He didn't go any farther. That night, the German shepherd returned, but it didn't eat. It stood on the porch, eyes locked on his, and then turned slowly toward the trees. Then, without a sound, it walked away. This time, Daniel grabbed his coat and flashlight, and followed. The forest swallowed Daniel whole as he stepped into the trees. The beam of his flashlight cut through the dark like a knife, but the silence felt heavier with every step. The German shepherd moved ahead, its gait purposeful, not pausing to check if Daniel was following. It knew the way. That much was clear. Branches creaked like old bones. Leaves crunched beneath his boots. The air was colder here, too cold for early November. After about 15 minutes, the German shepherd stopped. It stood perfectly still, head tilted toward a thick tangle of underbrush. Daniel slowed. His flashlight trembled slightly in his hand. This where you go every night? The German shepherd looked back at him once, then pushed through the brush. Daniel followed. On the other side was a small clearing. Overgrown, yet oddly symmetrical. A faint impression of something man-made. A path or what used to be one. A decaying log stretched across the far side like a crude bench. In front of it, dirt disturbed in patches. Not fresh, but not untouched either. The German shepherd sat at the edge of the clearing, watching, waiting. Daniel didn't speak. He didn't move closer. He just observed. This was no random animal behavior. This was memory, ritual. The next day, Daniel tried to convince himself it was nothing. Maybe the German shepherd was trained. Maybe it used to belong to someone who lived out here. A poacher? A hunter? But when he returned that evening to the clearing, alone, the German shepherd was already there. It was always there. And each time, it circled the same patch of earth. Not digging. Not sniffing. just watching. By the 7th night, Daniel brought a shovel. He didn't use it, not yet, but he leaned it against a tree like a silent agreement. Soon, that same night, sleep wouldn't come. Instead, old headlines played through his mind. The missing hiker from 3 years ago. The backpacker who vanished near the state line. Rumors of a woman last seen hitchhiking near these woods. Daniel hadn't thought about any of them in years. Until now. He sat up in bed and stared at the German Shepherd, lying by the front door like a sentry. Its eyes were closed, but Daniel could swear it wasn't asleep. He whispered into the dark, "What did you see out there, boy?" No answer came, just the weight of something unspoken filling the room. The German Shepherd opened one eye, and Daniel knew, whatever was buried out there, it wasn't just a body. It was a story, and maybe, just maybe, it wasn't finished. The next morning, Daniel rose before the sun. The shovel waited on the porch like a dare. The German Shepherd was already there, sitting with its back to him, eyes fixed on the path leading into the woods. No leash, no command, just shared silence. Together they walked. Daniel wasn't sure what he expected to find. Bones, maybe remnants. But he hadn't touched the dirt yet. Something in him still held back, not out of fear of what he'd uncover, but fear that once he knew, he'd be responsible for it. In the clearing, the air felt colder than before. The shepherd sat again, this time closer to the disturbed earth. Daniel could see it now. There was a pattern, 4 patches, spaced apart, marked like graves. He knelt, his hand brushing over one of the patches. The German Shepherd let out a low breath, almost like a sigh. Daniel's fingers paused. "I'll need help digging," he muttered, more to himself than to the German Shepherd. That afternoon, Daniel brought out Ken's stew and a second bowl. The German Shepherd didn't eat right away. It waited until Daniel sat with him. When he finally did, the shepherd lowered its head and began to eat. They didn't speak, because they couldn't, but something passed between them. A rhythm, an understanding, a bond not built with words but with presence. Later that night, Daniel tried something new. He left the door open, just a crack. When he awoke hours later from a dream he couldn't remember, the German Shepherd was asleep at the foot of the bed. Quiet, as if it had always belonged there. The next day, Daniel began to dig. It was slow, careful work. He unearthed a few rusted beer cans, an old boot, a piece of broken chain. Nothing that said murder, but everything screamed forgotten. The German Shepherd sat beside him the whole time. One afternoon, while digging at the far edge of the 4th mound, Daniel's shovel hit something different. Rotted but intact. He paused, looked at the German Shepherd. The shepherd didn't move, but its ears flicked back, and it let out a sound Daniel hadn't heard before. Not a growl, but a mournful hum deep in its chest. Like grief, Daniel knelt and brushed the dirt away with his hands. It was a box. He didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, he sat down beside the German Shepherd and stared at the trees, as if they could tell him what to do. "You stayed out here all this time," Daniel said quietly, waiting for someone to come back. The German Shepherd looked up at him, eyes still sharp, but softer now. Daniel reached out and placed a hand on its head. The shepherd leaned into it. Trust finally returned. But they both knew the silence wouldn't last. Not now that the truth had started to surface. Daniel waited until the following morning to open the box. The forest was thick with frost, but his hands didn't shake from cold. They trembled with the weight of a secret too long buried. The German Shepherd lay beside him, alert but calm, as if it knew the moment had finally come. The wooden box cracked open easier than expected. The hinges were rusted, the lid damp. Inside were objects wrapped in layers of fabric, old, faded, but carefully folded. Daniel removed the cloth slowly, revealing what looked like a journal, a rusted locket, and a torn photo of a young woman standing beside a familiar figure. His breath caught. The man in the photo was wearing a park ranger's badge, an old design from the same station Daniel had once worked at. But it wasn't him. The shepherd stood and took a step closer, nose twitching. Then Daniel saw it. Scratched into the inside of the box lid were 4 names, carved with something sharp. One of them was circled. Eva. The memory hit him like a flood. Eva Mitchell. The missing intern from 7 years ago. She was assigned to a remote trail maintenance project with a supervisor Daniel had never trusted. The man had quit abruptly and vanished before the investigation. Nothing was ever found. No leads. No closure. Until now. Daniel looked at the shepherd, whose eyes were fixed on the box. His mind raced. Could this German shepherd have belonged to her? Was he the one who stayed behind, guarding her final resting place, night after night? He barely noticed the crack of a branch behind him. Too late. The blow knocked him sideways. He landed hard against the frozen earth. The box tumbled into the brush. A dark figure loomed, hooded, holding a length of pipe. The shepherd lunged. Fangs met flesh. Growls exploded through the clearing. The attacker cursed and swung, hitting the German shepherd once, twice. But the shepherd didn't let go. Daniel scrambled to his feet, reaching for the shovel. He struck wildly, knocking the attacker backward. The man stumbled and fled into the woods, leaving behind a trail of blood and curses. Silence returned, but it wasn't peaceful. The shepherd limped toward Daniel and collapsed at his feet. Blood stained its side. Daniel fell to his knees. "Stay with me," he whispered, pressing both hands against the wound. "You held on this long. Don't stop now." The German shepherd didn't whine. It just looked at him, steady, tired, but unbroken. Daniel grabbed the box, the photo, the journal. He lifted the shepherd gently into his arms and ran, back to the cabin, back to the phone, back to the world he had abandoned. It was time to speak, to report, to remember, and to finally finish the story that this German shepherd had never stopped trying to tell. The hospital lights were too bright. Too clean. Daniel sat in the corner of the emergency vet clinic, his flannel shirt soaked in the shepherd's blood, hands shaking not from fear, but from guilt. The German shepherd had saved his life, twice. And still, Daniel hadn't even known his name. They'd stabilized him, barely. Puncture wound. Internal bleeding. But the vet had said one thing that stuck. This German shepherd's a fighter. Daniel believed it. Hell, he'd seen it. Outside, morning crept across the sky. The sun filtered in through the window like a slow apology. Later that day, Daniel handed over the contents of the box to the sheriff's office. He told them everything, what he found, who he suspected, even the old trail logs he still had in storage from his time at the ranger station. It reopened a case that had long been buried, just like Eva. But now there was evidence. Coordinates. Testimony. The story made headlines by the end of the week. Missing woman's case reopened after discovery by retired ranger and German shepherd. But none of that mattered to Daniel as much as the moment he returned to the clinic and heard the words, "He's awake." The shepherd looked up as Daniel entered the recovery room. One ear twitched. The same sharp eyes. The same stillness. Daniel sat beside him. "I think I owe you more than a name." He paused. "Eva called you Shadow, didn't she?" The German shepherd blinked. "Just once." Daniel smiled softly. "Fitting." Shadow healed slowly. Scars remained, on both of them. But something had shifted. Daniel no longer sat alone at the edge of the forest. Now he walked the trails again, with Shadow by his side. He reopened old maps, revisited cabins, left flowers at markers. For Eva. For others. For the forest itself. They started getting visitors, journalists, rangers, locals who had heard the story and wanted to know more. But Daniel never gave them more than the facts. The truth, he believed, had already been told, by the German shepherd who waited, by the dirt that remembered, and by the silence that had finally been broken. One evening, Daniel stood at the edge of the clearing, Shadow beside him, wind rustling through the trees. "She never gave up on you," he whispered. The shepherd looked up, eyes softer now, older. Daniel added, "And you never gave up on her." Shadow leaned gently against his leg. No words, no tricks, just the weight of truth between them. A man, a German shepherd, and a promise finally fulfilled. Sometimes, loyalty lasts longer than life. Shadow never left the place where truth was buried, not out of instinct, but love. If this story moved you, share it with someone who believes that even silence can carry meaning. Like, subscribe, and share if this story touched your heart.